Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's get started with our big focus tonight. It is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 74th birthday today, and it coincides with the Modi government completing 100 days in office in its third term. On the occasion, we on Global Lens will take an in-depth look at India's foreign policy as shaped by Prime Minister Modi's vision over the past decade since he assumed office in 2014. We'll examine the many accomplishments, out-of-the-box decisions and the challenges that have defined India's foreign policy in recent times. Whether you agree or not with some of the major foreign policy decisions of the last decade, one thing is indisputable. In these 10 years of Prime Minister Modi's tenure, India has vastly reshaped its foreign policy landscape. Most analysts are of the view that his tenure has been marked by an assertive and strategic approach to international relations. Keeping India's national interests first, enhancing India's global stature and fostering economic and security partnerships have been unmistakable high points of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's foreign policy. Let's look at some specific instances that demonstrated the success of India's foreign policy in recent times. Under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, the country has consistently demonstrated its resolve to bring its people home safely from every challenging situation, whatever the circumstances. From evacuating Indian citizens from war-torn countries like Syria and Yemen, to launching Operation Ganga to evacuate Indian students stranded in war-torn Ukraine. The message has been crystal clear: no Indian citizen should be left behind. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when even the richest and most developed countries of the world left poor and small nations to fend for themselves, India exported over 200 million doses of COVID vaccines to over 100 countries under the Vaccine Maitri initiative. This initiative was instrumental in addressing vaccine shortages in various regions and strengthened India's diplomatic ties around the world and showcased its role as a responsible and generous global player. Prime Minister Modi's approach to South Asia has been both pragmatic and ambitious. His government succeeded in finalizing the landmark land boundary agreement between India and Bangladesh. The South Asian satellite GSAT-9 launch was a milestone in South Asian regional cooperation. Prime Minister Modi's government has adeptly navigated complex geopolitical landscapes to secure India's economic interests. A prime example is India's procurement of discounted Russian crude oil despite international sanctions, showcasing the country's strategic autonomy and pragmatic approach to energy security. The bold move, made in the face of Western pressure, not only met India's domestic energy demands, but also demonstrated its ability to balance economic priorities with diplomatic sensitivities in a volatile global environment. In the process, New Delhi also managed to quite deftly call out Western hypocrisy on the issue of Russian oil and gas imports, with Foreign Minister Jaishankar once schooling Western journalists by saying, "What India buys from Russia in a month, Europe buys in an afternoon." India's growing diplomatic influence has positioned it as a potential mediator in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, with the world increasingly looking to India to play a constructive role in conflict resolution. A fact acknowledged by both Russia and Ukraine, as well as multiple other countries. If there is one country today that is perceived as an unbiased and honest peace broker which can potentially end this conflict, it is India. This reflects India's emergence as a trusted friend and reliable partner on the global stage, as well as a prominent voice for the global south. India's successful presidency of the G20 in 2023 marked a significant milestone in its trajectory as a rising power. Under India's leadership, the G20 achieved what looked like a very elusive consensus on key global issues, including the Russia-Ukraine war, and took the historic step of including the African Union as a permanent member of the grouping. These accomplishments solidified India's position as an emerging world leader capable of bridging diverse international perspectives and championing inclusive global governance. Many countries, including Russia and Iran, have agreed to trade in the Indian rupee, strengthening India's economic leverage, enhancing India's economic sovereignty and reducing dependency on the dollar. This policy has boosted India's economic influence and reduced vulnerabilities related to currency fluctuations and international trade dynamics. Under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, India has initiated and led several international alliances, demonstrating its commitment to addressing global challenges and its ability to mobilize international cooperation. These include the International Solar Alliance, the Global Big Cat Alliance, the Global Biofuel Alliance, and many others. When the Cold War between the US and USSR was raging and shaping the contours of international politics in the initial 2 decades following India's independence, its foreign policy was determined by the principle of non-alignment. However, today, India has moved to the era of multi-alignment, as has been outlined by External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar on multiple occasions and driven by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of India's place on the global stage. Today, India skillfully maneuvers between China-led or Russia-led groupings such as the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, along with its involvement in US-led groupings such as the Quad. India is part of the International North-South Transport Corridor, a multimodal transport corridor connecting St. Petersburg in Russia to Mumbai in India. The corridor offers a platform for India to collaborate with Russia, Iran and the Central Asian republics towards fostering a Eurasian free trade area. Then there is the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. On the sidelines of the G20 Leaders Summit in September last year, the leaders of India, the European Union, France, Germany, Italy, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and the United States announced an MOU committing to work together to develop this corridor, which promises a transformative integration of Asia, Europe and the Middle East. India is an important member of BRICS, a grouping of the world's leading emerging economies such as Brazil, Russia, China and South Africa. India was instrumental in co-founding the New Development Bank, a new multilateral initiative expected to rival the World Bank in the times to come. India is a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a Eurasian political and economic organization, and then there is the Quad, Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, an informal strategic dialogue between India, the US, Japan and Australia with a shared objective to ensure and support a free, open and prosperous Indo-Pacific region and counter China's growing expansionism and aggression. In the last 10 years, the government led by Prime Minister Modi has pursued what India proudly calls its strategic autonomy. The rise in India's standing from a struggling developing nation to one of the fastest growing economies in the world and an emerging power has given it a seat at numerous tables, Quad, G20, BRICS, the SCO, and bolstered its claim to permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Prime Minister Modi's third term in office this year began with India's participation in the BRICS foreign ministers meeting in Russia and the outreach session of G7 in Italy. Though not a member of G7, India gets invited regularly to its annual summits, in a clear indication that the West sees value in having India as an interlocutor and partner when global challenges are under discussion. As we said earlier, India has the most unique position on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, as it has maintained friendly ties with both the warring nations and is respected and trusted as an honest peace broker by all sides. Prime Minister Modi's famous words to Russian President Vladimir Putin, "This is not an era of war," resonated around the world and have been quoted by several world leaders. Prime Minister Modi visited Russia in July this year. It sparked criticism in Western policy-making circles and media. It was condemned by Ukrainian President Zelensky, but it demonstrated India's pragmatism, strategic autonomy and commitment to a time-tested friendship. Putin warmly welcomed Prime Minister Modi in Moscow and referred to him as a dear friend. And the development that took many by surprise was Prime Minister Modi's decision to visit Ukraine the very next month. In his talks with both the Russian president and the Ukrainian president, Prime Minister Modi was categorical. India has always been on the side of peace. Dialogue and diplomacy are the only way forward. No solution can be found on the battlefield. India strongly advocates for peace in the region and is willing to play any role necessary in conflict resolution and restoration of peace and normalcy. Both the presidents have acknowledged India's role in the peace efforts. Putin has said that India, along with China and Brazil, can act as a mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Zelensky has even suggested that India can host a second peace summit. All these instances have powerfully demonstrated how India is ready to play a major role in global geopolitics without compromising on its pursuit of national interests and without a strong alignment with any major world power. This is India asserting its strategic autonomy like never before. Despite international pressure, India is walking a diplomatic tightrope while balancing its ties with Russian and Western partners. While the West has viewed India's reluctance to openly condemn Russia with skepticism, India is still the United States' net security provider in the region. During Prime Minister Modi's state visit to the US last year, President Biden described the India-US relationship as the defining partnership of the 21st century. India's stance on Russia is based on its national interests and dictated by the country's right to an independent foreign policy and the ability to choose its own allies. Of course, it's challenging to maintain this delicate balance in the face of mounting geopolitical pressures, but India has shown the world that it will not bow to any pressure and will certainly not be dictated to. The last couple of years have marked an inflection point in India's foreign policy, from holding the presidency of the UN Security Council in December 2022 to the Global South Summit, participating in the G7 and Quad summits, and hosting the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Through its G20 presidency, India was able to get the most powerful and consequential countries of the world to gather around the table, discuss and agree on some of the most pressing and intractable issues concerning the world. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar later remarked, "When we took the presidency, people did not have many expectations from it. Through our G20 presidency, we bridged all the divides, found a common ground for countries which were otherwise arguing amongst themselves and who found it very difficult to reconcile, but we were able to bridge it." India's goal has been to burnish its strategic autonomy credentials through these summits, balancing close ties with its Western partners with its historical claim to leadership amongst the world's not-so-privileged countries, now referred to as the Global South. In this regard, India has succeeded. In fact, India took the lead in raising Global South's concerns by virtually hosting the first ever Voice of Global South Summit. At least 125 countries participated, and India carried this theme forward to the G20 summit. It is clear that the evolution of India's foreign policy from non-alignment to multi-alignment has yielded rich dividends. Of course, questions continue to be asked as to whether New Delhi can continue to straddle all sides amidst intensified rivalry between the United States and its allies and China and Russia. But it has demonstrated that, in fact, it can be done. Some analysts have pointed out that India has sealed its status amongst the major powers and important groupings as a friend to all and an enemy to none. They say all camps seem to need India on their side. India's global influence is not attributed to its size alone, but also to its growing economic clout, especially technological and military capabilities. As its influence increases, India is poised to play a greater role as a bridging power, a peacemaker and a consensus builder on the global stage without compromising on its national interests, and that is where the success of India's foreign policy lies. Of course, there are challenges galore, from the intractable border dispute with China to India's ties with many of its neighbors suffering setbacks in recent times. In the course of the show, we'll look at the biggest success stories and the setbacks in the trajectory of India's foreign policy in the Modi era. All right, let's go straight across to our guest. We are joined tonight by Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India. So thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. I will come straight to the most fundamental question. What do you think are the biggest factors that have shaped India's foreign policy in the Modi era, and how much of a success do you think it's been?
Well, I think in managing an active and successful foreign policy, you need leadership. Confident, clear, assertive leadership. Assertive not in the sense of throwing one's weight around, but asserting India's national interest and giving it primacy. I think Prime Minister Modi has provided that kind of leadership, without which we would not have attained the kind of successes that you have outlined in your introduction. Number two, if there is a big gap in what you want to do internationally and your domestic situation, especially economic, then you are actually boxing above your weight. And countries, while they may be polite and diplomatic with you, they may not take you that seriously because they know that the ground on which you stand internally is not very strong. And that is where Prime Minister Modi has been successful, because he has pursued policies which have seen a very rapid rise in India's economic growth, to the point of India becoming the 5th largest economy, and in another couple of years becoming the 3rd largest economy. So when a country like India, with a virtually $4 trillion economy and set to reach 5 trillion, acts on the global stage, then other countries have to take note. They have to accept that they cannot push India around, and they have to accommodate India when it comes to its national interest. Now, in your introduction, you mentioned many of the initiatives Prime Minister Modi has taken, including the very successful G20 summit, and that has consolidated India's role as a peacemaker and as a bridge between adversaries. we managed to get a final communique at the G20 meeting, overcoming the possibilities that we may not have succeeded in at all because of the fundamental differences between Russia and the West on this issue. But we were able to bridge this gap. So that's the second thing, that our economy has given Prime Minister Modi the kind of foundation on which to project our international image. The third is that Prime Minister has been extremely active in terms of visiting numerous countries. You know, this needs a certain degree of energy. I mean, if you contrast him, I don't want to criticize Prime Minister Manmohan Singh unnecessarily, but if you contrast with the kind of frequency of visits that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made to world capitals and what Prime Minister Modi has done, the contrast is striking. I mean, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh did not even visit properly our neighboring countries, our immediate neighboring countries. But look at the number of times that the Prime Minister has done that. And he's done that because he understands that we must have a stable and secure neighborhood, whatever the challenges. It's not as if the challenges are not absent. We've seen in the case of Maldives, where we've been able to recover the situation, and now we've had a setback in Bangladesh. But what Prime Minister and Sheikh Hasina had done in the previous 10 years is to build bonds between the two countries which cannot be easily broken. In fact, Bangladesh, whatever it says and does in its current period of turmoil, will soon realize the reality on the ground. The kind of interdependence that has been created, which is mutually beneficial, both to India and to Bangladesh. With Sri Lanka, you've seen how we came to their help, giving them almost $5 billion of assistance at a time when their economy was collapsing. In Prime Minister, and then Prime Minister has visited countries as far as Fiji. He's had a summit meeting with the island states of the Pacific. He's had a summit meeting with the Caribbean states. He's paid a lot of attention to small countries. Why has he done that? Because if we want to be a voice of the global South, then we can't be selective that we will only deal with Brazil or South Africa or the major countries of the global South. We have then to spread our net wider, and with also this aim that within the United Nations, we should have a body of countries which support us, which relate to us, which value the relationship with us. Of the Security Council, and there's voting in the UN General Assembly, then every country has one vote. And that is why it's very important to cultivate the smaller countries. The initiative we took to make the African Union a part of permanent member of the G20 was a very thoughtful diplomatic stroke, which won over the African countries in terms of their relationship with India. We've had African summits and all that, of course. But we have given Africa a voice in what today is the most important multilateral group, because the larger multilateral system has not worked. The United Nations is not working. The UN Security Council is not working. G20 is the only forum in which you have everybody, China, Russia, United States, the G7 countries, Saudi Arabia, and what have you. And here, Prime Minister brought in the African Union to balance the European Union, which also has a permanent seat in the G20. So these are the many initiatives he has taken. And then what you rightly mentioned in your introduction, that we've been able to balance our relationship with key powers of the world in this uncertain global situation where there is so much tension and there's conflict. And the big powers are ranged against each other, with the US, Europe, and Britain, and Japan, Australia, Canada ranged on one side, and Russia and China, and now North Korea is probably joining them, ranged on the other side. We actually have positioned ourselves in a way where we can actually play a bridging role, a real bridging role, because we can talk to all sides. Of course, we have a problem with China, and that hampers our diplomacy. But nevertheless, we have carefully managed that relationship with China at the geopolitical level, though not at the bilateral level. But we managed that by being member of the BRICS and SCO, and possibly the RIC, the Russia-India-China dialogue, perhaps can be resuscitated, though not at the summit level. Our foreign minister is frequently meeting the Chinese foreign minister, so as to keep the channels of a dialogue open with China and play a game of patience, so that at some stage, China hopefully would realize that it is in their interest to make peace with India, not on their terms, but on mutually satisfactory terms. So here we have positioned ourselves as a very valuable player, and countries are looking at us, as you rightly said, to be a go-between with regard to the raging conflict in Europe, which risks to become extremely serious, as there is the nuclear dimension that is involved. And with the kind of escalation that is being considered by the West, anything can happen. And therefore, India has to play a very vital role. Prime Minister has taken a risk based on the fact that he has now credibility on the global stage to see if he can nudge the two sides in the Ukraine conflict to looking at peace and dialogue and diplomacy as a possible route to a solution. It will not be easy, but he has credibility. He's gone to Russia, he's gone to Ukraine. There is some kind of, I won't say a plan, but some exchange of ideas on how a solution can be found, which is why the National Security Advisor was sent specially to meet President Putin and in order to explain to him or brief him on the conversations that our Prime Minister had with Zelensky. This is remarkable, frankly, since I've been ambassador to Russia. I know a little bit on how Russia views such meetings. They are very difficult when it comes to even meeting foreign ministers, much less the national security advisors. But the credibility of our Prime Minister is such that President Putin made the exceptional gesture of having the National Security Advisor of India sitting across the table and explaining to him what the Prime Minister's conversations were in Ukraine, in Kiev. So all these are, and there are many other aspects of our foreign policy under him, which we can easily characterize as great success. As you mentioned, India, the voice of the Global South. Now, this is very important. We've had 2 summits of the Global South and the third one also very recently. This gives us a lot more space in terms of international diplomacy, because then the other countries look at India not as India alone, but India, which if is not the acknowledged leader of the Global South, but which has a finger on the pulse of the Global South and can therefore articulate what the demands and expectations of the Global South are. And therefore, when there are going to be reforms of the international system, economic and political, then what India says would be important, because it would be reflecting also what is the general demand of the Global South. So this also increases Prime Minister Modi's and India's stature in his international conferences and meetings and relations in general.
A lot of factors that seem to have contributed to India's rising global stature. So let me ask you this question. Even though it is said that diplomacy is conducted between nations and not leaders, but what do you think about Prime Minister Modi's charm offensive, if I may use that term? The fact that he has personal camaraderie with so many world leaders, that has been quite evident, during his meetings with them at both bilateral and multilateral fora.
Well, yes, largely it is true that diplomacy is between nations. But then why do we elect leaders? I mean, if diplomacy between nations, then we can do with a poor leader who can't articulate the country's interest or pursue it on the national stage with any degree of credibility. I don't think that it's as simple as that. I mean, nations fine, but nations have to have leadership, and therefore the leader becomes very important. And the leader's understanding of what national interests are. I mean, we can talk in general terms of national interest, but who defines this national interest? If the leader has clarity of mind, an understanding of what the needs of the country are and what the challenges are, then he can define the national interest in ways that would actually maximize it. But if you're not clear about your definition of national interest, you can lose a lot of ground, which is why personal diplomacy is important. Definitely it's important, because how you relate to other leaders, what your credibility is, what is your capacity to explain your viewpoint, both in terms of your own domestic, not challenges, in terms of how you define your place in the global stage, it becomes very important. So Modi is very articulate. He has a vision, and people credit him for that. I know, for instance, that I know it from the inside, that the French president has been talking to him a lot. He respects him, he values his views, and consults with him. And Prime Minister has been talking to other world leaders too frequently. They're in contact with each other. Even President Putin has said that he has been talking frequently to Prime Minister Modi, and Prime Minister Modi has said the same thing. He's been also talking to President Biden. Today, the nature of diplomacy has changed. It is not formalistic as it used to be. But now people pick up telephones and speak to each other. They even pass on WhatsApp messages to each other. So therefore, that personal touch becomes very, very important. Yes.
And who has done it better than Prime Minister Modi, lending that personal touch to diplomacy? Final question, sir. There have been many success stories, as far as India's foreign policy over the last decade is concerned, but you will concede that there have been challenges too, whether it is the intractable border issue with China or the setbacks that India has suffered in its neighborhood. How big are those challenges in your view?
They're very big. The challenge with China is very, very big because China has a certain view of its international role. It wants to be the principal power in Asia. It doesn't believe in multipolarity. In fact, it is vying for a bipolar world where China and the United States are the principal powers, and understanding between them will shape the global environment. Now, the only country that can challenge that cozy scenario for China is India, because of its size, its economic rise, its human potential. And therefore, China is not going to easily resolve outstanding issues on the border with us, because then it frees India from a whole lot of handicaps that we are currently suffering from. Partly, of course, the huge burden on us in terms of building infrastructure on the border, keeping our military preparedness so that if there's a challenge, we can face it. And then the China-Pakistan equation. I mean, the United States has recently sanctioned a lot of Chinese firms for supplying missile technology to Pakistan. So China will continue to use Pakistan to try and neutralize India in the strategic sphere with nuclear and missile technology. So that challenge will remain. And then China's challenge is our neighborhood. After all, it has huge financial resources, which it uses to do projects, build infrastructure, buy up the political classes, because it is pretty amoral in this respect. There's no internal challenge to how, let's say, President Xi does things, unlike Prime Minister Modi. Constantly he has to face domestic challenges about his policies and has to explain them. So this is a handicap that democracies have, fortunately or unfortunately. So that challenge is there. in our neighborhood. Then the maritime strategy of China, building up a huge navy. It already is the biggest navy in the world in terms of numbers. And why are they building this? Not to be confined to the South China Sea. It is to eventually come into the Indian Ocean. And then in order to fly in the Indian Ocean, it needs bases. So eventually they try and build bases here. So
Right.
in the Indian Ocean, therefore we have to then look ahead and see how we're going to challenge. And that's where what you said earlier, our relationship with China, with the United States, Quad and all that comes in order to build up some deterrent capabilities. So China therefore has to behave as a lawful member of the international system
Right.
rather than seek to exert hegemony on first in South China Sea, East China Sea, Southeast Asia, and then the rest of the world through the BRI program and everything else.
Absolutely. So there are plenty of challenges in the neighborhood, but plenty of success stories to revel in. Whichever way you look at it, Prime Minister Modi has certainly redefined India's foreign policy. On that note, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for talking to us, sir.
A pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right, let's now move on to our other guests. Joining me on the Global Lens now is Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Distinguished Fellow of Foreign Studies Program at the Gateway House, Professor Sanjay Pandey at the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JNU, and Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Researcher Foundation. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for waiting patiently. Let me start with Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. Sir, your take on how India's foreign policy has shaped up in the Modi era?
I think in a very objective manner, it can be said very clearly that in Mr. Modi, we have a foreign policy prime minister or foreign policy PM. This is one domain where he excels and he really enjoys conducting diplomacy at the highest possible level. I think he has contributed to the cult or the art of summit diplomacy in a very, very significant and substantive manner. I think at this stage, when we are talking about 10 years of Mr. Modi's foreign policy, we can clearly see that there were two phases. One from 2014 to the COVID time, roughly 2019-20, and the other post-COVID, the last 4 or 5 years. In the first phase, there was a very extensive approach to reach out to the world from Mexico to South Pacific. Then in the second one, first we had to handle the COVID-related complications and this whole question of economic recovery. And then before that challenge could be met, there were two new challenges, the two wars, Ukraine and Gaza conflict. And as a result, India's foreign policy had to tackle and factor in those challenges as well. But in overall terms, I think when it comes to foreign policy, India has every reason to be proud of its prime minister, its foreign policy machinery, its national security strategy and framework. And I think we can say that the team Modi has very successfully protected and promoted India's national interest, but keeping its worldview in picture. It is not just about India, but it is also India's contribution to the welfare of the world, particularly the developing countries and the global south. So in overall terms, I would say as a practitioner and as a student of foreign policy, that the Modi government receives very high marks for its performance.
The Modi government receives high marks for its performance. India can be proud of its foreign policy, you are saying. Manoj Joshi, for you, the big hits and misses of Modi's foreign policy over the past decade?
Well, you see, I think it's important to take into account the fact that Modi's performance has gone along with India's performance, meaning India's rise also has been noticeable. And so we have been fortunate that we have a Prime Minister who has synchronized his diplomacy along with the rise of the country. So when you talk of hits I think without doubt, the strengthening of the relationship with the United States has been a major hit. Meaning it is since 2017 that the Indo-Pacific strategy has been worked out. The Quad was revived. And after that, we have seen that India signed all the foundational agreements, began the process of 2+2 meetings with the United States. And a lot of this culminated last June when the Prime Minister went to Washington. And we saw the signature on a number of agreements, as well as reference to a number of agreements, which spoke of a much, much closer technology and economic partnership with the United States. So I would say the United States is a major hit out there. Then, if I want to look at it in a very contrasting fashion, another hit has been the manner in which India handled Maldives. When the new government in Maldives was elected, it came up on an India out platform. But India did not overreact. Instead of that, we slowly and patiently worked. And the result is that today, our relationship with Maldives has once again become strong with the same person who had led the India out program, President Moizu. So as I said, I can see very distinct hits here. If you talk of misses, some of the misses have been, and of course, I can't forget the G20, the Global South, the leadership of the Global South. I think India has very categorically and clearly sent a signal to the world that it will be the bridge, that they should come to India, and it will serve as the bridge. And India has served as a bridge not only there, India is serving a bridge on the Ukraine issue as well. We have not been so active on the Gaza front, but we have been active on the Ukraine front, which has been visible recently by the Prime Minister's visits to Russia and Ukraine, as well as the recent visit of the National Security Advisor to Russia. As far as the misses are concerned, I would say, some of the misses are circumstances which are outside our control. And one of the primary ones, of course, is Bangladesh, which we have not been able to, which was something which was out of our control. We have reacted to it. How we react to it remains to be seen, I think. But otherwise, I would say that by and large, the Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy has been one of hits and not misses.
More hits than misses. Interesting. China remains an intractable issue. Bangladesh may be a setback, but you're saying that really was beyond India's control, driven more by circumstances. Let me take this to Professor Sanjay Pandey. Professor Pandey, what is your assessment of the way India's foreign policy has navigated multiple geopolitical minefields in the last 10 years, while in a sense redefining itself, under Prime Minister Modi's leadership?
I would say the biggest achievement has been the seamless manner in which the government has tried to merge economic development agenda with security, preparedness, and need to bring India to the front stage on the global arena. So there has been a way in which the domestic and foreign policy and security agendas have been brought together in a very seamless manner. The second most distinctive thing about the government's foreign policy is its adaptiveness and suppleness. In the initial 4 or 5 years, we have seen how, with some of the difficult neighbors, especially with China and Pakistan, Prime Minister Modi adopted a certain approach of trying to indulge them, inviting the Pakistani Prime Minister to his inauguration in 2014. Then the summit meetings with the informal summit meetings with Chinese president in Wuhan 2018, and then in Mamallapuram in 2019. But soon he realized that this alone is not going to work. India has to be prepared to deal with these challenges. And therefore, the way India has tried to build its infrastructure on the border, for example, with China, and tried to recalibrate its policy with China and Pakistan and other neighbors. And of course, the very fine balancing act that it has done with Russia and US on the one hand, Iran and US on the other hand, and dealing with multiple global players and adopting a policy of multi-alignment, as has been said, is the major achievement. So a certain pragmatism, a certain suppleness, and ability to understand the changing global situation and to adapt the country's foreign policy according to it. Some of the challenges, rather I would say opportunities, and the agenda or the task that the government has before it, one can say that they need to conclude some free trade agreements, whether with EU or with UK or with Eurasian Economic Community or other players, or for example, Gulf Cooperation Council.
Yes.
So this is one major task that I see for the government. Once again, talking about suppleness, I would say the way we have dealt with the Gaza and the Ukraine war and the silent diplomacy with which we are trying to deal with Afghanistan, again testifies to the pragmatism and the nuanced approach that the government has adopted.
Silent diplomacy with Afghanistan, shuttle diplomacy between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of suppleness, pragmatism, and most certainly asserting its strategic autonomy, refusing to compromise on its national interests, and maintaining a delicate balance between major world powers. I think those are some of the factors that clearly define the success story of India's foreign policy over the last decade. On that note, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Professor Sanjay Pandey, Manoj Joshi, thank you so much to all of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now move on to some big breaking news that's coming in this evening from Lebanon. More than 1,000 people, including Hezbollah fighters and medics, have been injured in Lebanon after their communication pagers exploded. The explosions, believed to be caused by lithium batteries in the devices that they were carrying, led to widespread panic, as you can see in these pictures. A Hezbollah official has described the incident as the biggest security breach that the group has faced in nearly a year of conflict with Israel. These new communication devices carried by Hezbollah members contain lithium batteries which can smoke, melt and catch fire if they overheat. Such fires can reach temperatures of up to 590 degrees Celsius. The Israeli military has declined to comment on this situation, but hospitals in southern Beirut, a Hezbollah stronghold, have been overwhelmed by the casualties that have been reported. Ambulances have rushed to the scene. The Lebanese Red Cross dispatched over 50 ambulances to help. The explosions have not triggered panic across all of Lebanon, but certainly worsened the ongoing cross-border warfare between Hezbollah and Israel since the Gaza conflict began last October. Tens of thousands have already been displaced due to the violence on both sides of the border. For more on this story, let's now go across to our Deputy Managing Editor, Kartikeya Sharma. Kartikeya, quite a dramatic development this in Lebanon, and we don't quite know what led to this, but surely, the finger of, or the needle of suspicion rather, will point towards Israel.
That are emerging from Reuters, Associated Press, Guardian and New York Times. More than 1,500 Hezbollah fighters, terrorists have been injured. Now, if the reports are true, then it is one of the biggest cyber attacks done. As of now, Israel has not taken the credit for it. It never does. but there is an emergency meeting called by the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, Lebanese Red Cross, being reported by Vice, it has dispatched 50 ambulances and 300 medics. Now, if you look at those iconic visuals of the street where it burst, people would be befuddled to understand as to how a pager can cause an injury so grievous. So let me get you those details. Pagers have rechargeable lithium batteries. They are used in wide range of products. Now, the fire caused by the explosion of these batteries can produce heat up to 590 degrees Celsius. Yes, 590 degrees Celsius. And most of these batteries were recently purchased. And with this sort of an operation, it tells us that the war has acquired a bigger dimension, which means that this time Israel has decided to go and hit at Hezbollah. The wider understanding was that Israel will find it very, very difficult to attack Hezbollah because they have got more than 1 lakh fighters, far better trained than Hamas, better funded by Iran, with automatic weapons, with their own silos of rocket, a state to defend, which is Lebanon, and Hezbollah is part of their parliamentary process. It's not as if Hezbollah operates at a different layer in Lebanon. So keeping that in mind, the sort of operation that has happened is, I would say, has to be extremely complex. Yes, Israelis have done operations in Iran. They have used an automatic weapon against the Iranian scientist, in which he died and the gun was operated from Iran. If you would recall that they had an operation which took place under which they were able to attack the machinery involved in enriching of the uranium. But this is the first, I have to admit to you, and this has led to a lot of casualties. It's been reported that a couple of people who have died are also kith and kins of the parliamentarians. So young children have also died. So, this has attacked people across board. Now, the whole range of this, I would say, reportage is roughly an hour and 5 minutes old, Neha. It has happened all within hour and 5 minutes. That's the range of this massive attack that has taken place in Lebanon.
This is a massive attack by any stretch of imagination. In fact, Iran's state media has said their ambassador to Lebanon too has been wounded in this incident. All we know is more than 1,000 people have been injured, many of them Hezbollah fighters, but we're still waiting for more details, as to how many casualties there have been, how serious the injuries are. But we're told hospitals in South Beirut are already overwhelmed, and Hezbollah has gone ahead, Karthikeyan, and blamed Israel for what they're calling the biggest security breach that they've ever faced. I mean, imagine, just look at these visuals. All the pagers exploding at nearly the same time in a coordinated attack, which Hezbollah says is an Israeli breach of its communications network. I don't know if we've seen anything like this before.
No, Neha, I have not seen anything like this before. Yes, you were right. Iran's ambassador to Lebanon, Mojtaba Amani, was also injured in this explosion. Though Amani has superficial injury, it is being reported by The Guardian. And I'm being also told that this was not limited to an area. This was across Lebanon. Some of the wire agencies are reporting that, which is an important aspect of this investigation, that these pagers were recently imported by the Lebanese government. So let me read out what the Guardian is reporting as of now. They say that the pagers that detonated were the latest model brought in by Hezbollah in recent months. 3 security sources have told them. This has also been reported by Reuters. Now, whether these pagers were purchased from Jordan, whether these pagers were purchased from